A couple of tips you'd want to consider if you're going for an Amazon interview. The first one is preparing a behavioral interview is not rocket science. You only need two things. You need a story bank and some role play. What I observed over time, and for technical candidates in particular, is you have a tendency to overthink the story building process. So basically, it's common for me to see candidates with 50 or 60 page story banks who have never role-played those stories. I believe this is a mistake simply because a written story doesn't sound like a spoken one. So my advice to you would be, as soon as you have one or two or three stories, to try to role-play them, because in my experience this will yield some very interesting results. You'll be able to self-assess and decide for yourself where is the best area for improvement. In some cases, for candidates whose communication is your strength, no problem with that. You can continue your story building process. But if communication isn't, and you don't know how your answers will sound, then oftentimes candidates would like to balance their prep towards role play versus story writing process. The second thing I like to talk about here is with respect to the number of stories you prepare for a job interview. There's a good number of candidates, the ones who choose to prepare Amazon interviews, that prepare too few stories. You only prepare one story for each of the principles that they tell you to prepare for. What happens here is that if you'll only cross-check with the questions for leadership principle, you'll notice that one story will not be able to cover the entire principle. Furthermore, during job interviews, if you only have one story and you have too few stories, they take notes of this during job interviews, they confront those notes, and at the end, they will spot the fact that you don't have a ton of stories. And this may not come across as you think it would. It may come across as either you don't have sufficient experience, right? Either you want to intentionally bias them by overusing your best stories. So ideally, you would need 2 or 3 stories for each of the leadership principles. The third thing I like to talk about here is most people I work with don't apply for an Amazon job for the first time. And, there's various reasons for which you would fail an Amazon interview, such as not preparing it for the first time. But a very important reason I like to share with you here is candidates who do try to prepare them when it's too late. So an essential metric to track throughout your Amazon interview prep, if you do choose to prep, would be the time you need to achieve your goals. Time you need to to become proficient with roleplay, time you need to become proficient with your story bank. Always track the time you invest in Amazon interviews, because that's key. And I will also explain to you next why this is also another few reasons why this is important for you as a candidate, not for Amazon as an employer. Point number 4, with respect to pitching leadership principles in your stories and during job interviews, there's some very bad advice, in my opinion, that say you're asked a question on earned trust and you should pitch 5 other principles together with earned trust because more is better. I think, again, this is not ideal. I think you should focus on pitching one leadership principle, the one that is asking the question. And of course, you could also exhibit a little bit of ownership or high standards in your work, but that should go without saying it, so to speak. So only pitch the leadership principles they're interested in, and then, additional stuff is cosmetic, right? Point number 5, a very common advice, especially in the age of AI, is to use learnings and reflections throughout your answers. While this can be solid advice to certain stories and certain answers, I believe it's outright dumb to add learnings to every single possible answer or stories in your bank. I think common sense is something you would be the main takeaway from this one. Next one, the star format is great advice, and Amazon, I think, pioneered also the star format, or at least was within the first to recommend it. And nowadays, in the age of AI, expectations have evolved a little bit. Personally, what I found with my clients is that if you have no problem communicating your star format, you might as well come up with your own format. I could even talk about the DAN format, description, action, and some nuggets, simply because, it's so easy to come up with these formats that will significantly improve your ability to communicate your examples in a more impactful way. Furthermore, you will also score better on clarity of thought. So my advice to you would be to seriously consider transitioning from the STAR format. Also, a common mistake that candidates make will be to over-template your answers in the STAR format, and if you role-play them a little bit, then chances are they will also become flat, simply because, this format is so, it will not, if you overdo it, it will not be to your advantage, versus if you come up with your own format, that you will see there's a great opportunity for you to improve using that. Next thing I like to talk about here is that many candidates these days would rather spend their time rewarding their answers using AI versus roleplay. I'm also an enthusiast, an AI enthusiast myself. I use AI. I provide training programs which do provide AI features as well. But I believe that especially for improving your communication skills, a roleplay is critically important to self-assess your communication skills before considering to use AI for this purpose. Point number 8 here. You don't have to memorize anything for the purpose of Amazon interviews, such as to memorize some metrics from your older projects or to memorize other stuff that maybe happened in the past. A superior approach would be to use cheat sheets during Amazon interviews. Furthermore, you could also be upfront with your interviewer. Hey, you know what, interviewer, I have a cheat sheet here because I have some numbers, because I have a list of stories I want to ensure I cover, and I want to pick my best stories during the job interview. They never refuse this on the condition you're upfront with them, and on the condition you realize that nowadays there's a tendency for AI candidates as well, so you must not come across as suspicious. Next thing I like to talk about here is about the leadership principle that Amazon has. Amazon screens people on leadership principles because this is a framework that they developed for themselves and which works for Amazon. If this is a framework that works for Amazon, it doesn't mean that this framework will work for you as a candidate as well. What do I mean by this? If you remember earlier in the video, I said that most candidates who are my clients are not applying for the first time because they failed it the first time due to lack of time. So those Amazon leadership principles are a ton of work. Even if I share with you the questions you're likely going to ask during an Amazon interview, you're still not sure to pass it. In fact, many candidates know the questions they're going to get asked in Amazon interviews, yet still they fail those interviews altogether simply because there's a ton of work. Basically, what I'm pitching to you here is that it makes sense to simplify those leadership principles in only some core behaviors you'd want to focus yourself on, and to keep in mind that it's perfectly fine. I also sell training programs for Amazon interviews without those leadership principles, simply because I observed that there are shortcuts in the process, right? Because if the most important metric in preparing Amazon interviews is your time, if you don't have a lot of time, then it makes perfect sense to look for shortcuts. So if you could simplify those leadership principles, that may as well be to your advantage. And in many cases, it does. That's what I'm sharing this advice with you. And finally, a very important tip I'd like to share, especially with AI enthusiasts these days, is that bluffing in Amazon interviews has always been overrated. Okay, even when they hired a lot, basically you would get away even without bluffing in your Amazon interviews because they really had a need to hire. Now it's an employer-driven market. Now they're more careful with respect to whom they hire. But I sometimes hear people who can barely speak in full sentences ask me, Dan, but do you think I could read my answers from my computer screen during an Amazon interview? To which this makes me laugh, because you don't understand what it actually means to be able to cheat in Amazon interviews. To be worth considering cheating in Amazon interviews, first you must be really good. You have a strong story bank, and you must have seriously good interviewing skills and listening skills altogether. This is less than 2% or even less than 1% of candidates who can even consider cheating in Amazon interviews. And the context of cheating in Amazon interviews would not be to get the job, but to negotiate the best possible offer, right? So maybe as a final thing here, based on listening to many recorded Amazon interviews, it's also quite a difference between what you think, how your interview went, and how it actually went. So if you're looking for a post-mortem, keep this approach in mind. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.